Hello again. We are continuing our discussion of functions by talking about domain and range. So let's get started. Let's define some things first. The first thing is, what is the domain of a function? Well, the domain of a function is going to be the set of the first numbers of ordered pairs. And then the range is obviously then going to be the set of second numbers of those ordered pairs. All right, so let's look at some examples of ordered pairs. The domain is the x value. So in each ordered pair, you have an x and a y, and the domain is just all of those x's, and you only need to list them once. The range is going to be all of the y values in those ordered pairs, and you're going to list each of those exactly once. You don't need to repeat them. So for example, if I have these ordered pairs, 4, 1, 5, 2, 6, 3, and 7, 1, then the domain is going to be those four x's highlighted in yellow, 4, 5, 6, and 7, and the range is going to be the y's that are now highlighted in yellow, and those are the numbers 1, 2, 3. Notice that the number 1 appears twice, but you only need to list it once when you're listing out the range. Okay. Another way I can give you some data is in tables. So the domain is going to be the first row or column of the table, depending on how the table is set up, and the range is going to be the second row or column of that same table. So if I have a table like this, then the domain is going to be all those numbers listed in the first column, -2, 0, 1, and 3. Notice again, 1 is listed twice, but I only need to list it once when I'm talking about the domain. And then the range is going to be all those numbers in the second column, 2, 3, 4, and 5. Notice again, 2 is listed twice, but I really only need to list it once. Okay, there are things called mappings. That's another way I can give you some information, some data. And so the domain is going to be the set of numbers that are in the first bubble of that mapping, and the range is going to be all the numbers in the second bubble of that same mapping. So that's what a mapping looks like. The domain is going to be all of these numbers here highlighted in yellow, so 0, 1, 2, and 3. And the range is going to be all of those numbers in that second bubble, 2, 3, 4, and 5. All right, and the final way that I can give you some information is with a graph. So the domain of a graph is going to be how far the graph stretches along the x-axis. So we're going to use the x-axis to measure how far left and how far right the graph actually goes. And then the range is going to be how far it stretches along the y-axis. So we're going to use the y-axis to measure how far down and how far up the graph goes. And these are usually expressed in inequality notation. So for example, if I have this graph here, if I look at how far left and how far right the graph goes using the x-axis to measure that, it goes as far left as -4 and it goes as far right as +4 on the x-axis. So my domain is written as -4 less than or equal to x less than or equal to 4, meaning that x takes on values between -4 and 4. The range, I'm going to use the y-axis to measure that, and the function goes as low as -1 on the y-axis, and it goes as high as 10 on the y-axis. So the range is everything between -1 and 10, and I write that as -1 less than or equal to y less than or equal to 10. Okay, now we need to figure out, is something actually a function if I have the information listed as ordered pairs, in a table, in a mapping, or as a graph. So a relation is a function if each x in the domain is associated with exactly one y in the range. So I can't have the same x going to two different y's. Okay, so in ordered pairs, if I have these ordered pairs, you'll notice that each x is listed exactly once. So that is a function, but in the second example, you'll see that 3 is listed as an x twice, going to two different y's. So that relation is not a function. Okay, in table format, if I have that table there, on the left, you'll notice that each x is listed exactly once, so that is a function. But in the second table, the number -8 is listed twice, going to two different y's, so the second table is not a function. Okay, for mappings, you'll see those two examples there. The first mapping has every x, there's an arrow going from each x to a different y, but in the second example, that number 0 in the first bubble is going to two different y's in the second bubble, so that is not a function. Okay. For graphs, we're going to use something called the vertical line test. That's going to tell us whether a graph represents a function or not. And so what it says is if I can draw a vertical line and it can pass through any part of the graph at most once, then it is a function. So it can cross through it once, it cannot cross through it at all, but it can't go through it twice or more. So looking at the first example, there's a vertical line, and as I pass it through that function, you'll see that no matter where it was, it only passed through that function once. In the second example, same thing. I draw a vertical line and I kind of pass it through that whole function, and everywhere it was, it only crossed that function once. But then if I look at the third example and I drag that vertical line across, you'll see that there are several places where it passes through the graph twice. So that last example is not a function. Okay, so this is domain and range. If you have any questions about domain and range, please let me know, and I will see you tomorrow.